Anand, Professor Darin, Vice Chancellor of Pondicherry University, Professor V.C. Thomas, Professor Ashok Vora, Professor Venguata Ramani, Dr. Keshav Kumar, and brothers and sisters. Vanakkam. My throat is not clear, I have not been well, but I'll try my best to convey something on this thing. Those of you who are conversant with one of my earliest books, Ambedkar, In and For, the post-Ambedkar Dalit movement, popularly known as In and For, because of its convoluted title, would recall my problematization of Babasaheb Ambedkar's perspective on the state and religion. The text was noted as the critique of Ambedkar by many scholars. One of them likened me to Cornel West, who had presented a re-evaluation of W.E.B. Du Bois, radical ideologue and a leader of the black movement and contemporary of Ambedkar, pointing out two defects in his endeavor. He said that I was such a critic of Ambedkar. I am not sure of that, but surely the text did problematize some of the things in him that have later facilitated Western interests in taking his movement astray after him. What I wrote there is perhaps relevant to the theme of the seminar, and therefore I may cite it here. Quote, Ambedkar having experienced a brutal aspects of history and unbridled exploitation of man by man, appears in need of a control mechanism operating at two levels, basically internal and external, so as to maintain societal order in a desired state. The internal control mechanism is the model code provided by religion, and the one for external control is state. If this moral code is internalized by all individuals and in turn by society as the summation of the latter, as the liberal tradition held, society is expected to have an internal order. If, however, the baser instincts of some people or group of people defy this order, either as a result of conflicting code they follow or for any other reason, then in such a case, state will step in and restore the order. The will of the collective is supposed to be embodied in the state through constitution. It is therefore that Ambedkar had reservation in agreeing with Marx that religion was the opium of masses, or the state would eventually wither away. Ambedkar certainly did not know that order could be the attribute of the system itself. It could be homopous with the system itself. It is only in the 60s that cybernetics principles came to limelight that the complex probabilistic systems, which the social systems certainly are, do have the inherent capability of self-regulating and self-organizing control. But the state is directly of relevance here. Religion comes as a correlate of freedom via moral standards. Freedom requires moral standards to exercise self-evaluation, control and direction, which are provided by religion. While one may claim freedom to mean living according to one's own standards, even this very notion basically stems from the moral ideas about autonomy and authenticity in surrounding cultures to make sense. While we can make moral meanings on our own, interpreting them, shaping them, combining them in different and sometimes even incoherent ways, we can't invent them entirely from scratch in our own minds. Instead, we draw them from the particular cultures, communities, and traditions around us. These sources furnish morals material on the nature of personhood, the just society, the good life, duty towards others, and so on. We need to construct authentic lives for ourselves as free persons. The broadest, deepest, richest, and most important sources of this most significant source, both moral material, both historically and today, are religious traditions. Religion remains the most significant source of moral reflections and orientation to the good that our society has. Those with loose religious connections or no connections at all still participate in the social ethos, rich in religious meanings. Even avowed atheists inherit a culture deeply informed by religious sources of morality, sources they often wrestle with in defining their own moral orientations. This is the conception that perhaps informed Ambedkar's perspective. In this very first essay, Caste in India, their mechanism, genesis and development, he marks out religion of the Indian society, which is, quote, essentially primitive and its tribal code, in spite of the advanced time and civilization, quote, complete, operating in all pristine vigor even today as dictating the caste system. Although the caste system symbolizes extreme unfreedom, that does not invalidate religion as a source of moral standards, albeit a wrong one in this case. This reading continues throughout his life, reaching its zenith in his renouncing Hinduism and embracing Buddhism as the antidote to Hinduism's unfreedom. About the state, again I wrote about the state. Ambedkar's conception of state reflects some amount of autonomy from the hegemony of ruling classes. It is why he expected it to act as per the constitutional morality and endeavored to incorporate the pro-people bias into the constitution. He must have realized the true nature of it, the boundaries of the autonomy and basic class bias of the state while working in the Constituent Assembly, not just as a member, but as the chairman of its important drafting committee. In his anxiety to secure some provisions in favor of Dalits, he accepted to be the hack to write what was acceptable to the ruling caste class representatives. He must have thought that within the given constraint, he had done a good job of making the constitution, making it responsive to the needs of the downtrodden people. Indeed, many of the provisions in the directive principles and elsewhere apparently bear clear imprint of his zeal and owe their existence to him. But even they had to be within the strategic space provided by the rulers. His realization of the folly was near complete when he had to burst out in utter dejection at its ineffectual implementation, that he would be the first person to burn the constitution as it was of no good to anyone. He was inaccurate as the constitution had proved good enough to the upper caste class combined, who had hegemonized complete political space in post-1947 India. He attributed it to the devils in the congressmen who had occupied the constitutional temple of the state he and others had built. Had he lived little longer, he would have realized that the ones that he considered his co-workers to build the temple were themselves the agents of the very devils. Having broadly located the state and unfreedom in Ambedkar's schema, we can now attempt to discern his perspective on these two important components of social life. Freedom. As one scholar writes, idea of freedom is nomology in Ambedkar's schema. It is the foundational axiom to which his entire life struggle was directed. The first one obviously is the freedom from Chatur Varna, which was the sole doctrine of the stratification society into 4 Varnas and numerous castes. Freedom from the caste system was not alone for Dalits, whose cause he had espoused, but was for the entire country because it had eaten into the vitals of national polity. With the caste extent, he was convinced nothing worthwhile could be constructed in India, and hence he gave a clarion call of annihilation of caste. He said, turn in any direction you like, caste is the monster that crosses your path. You cannot have political reform, you cannot have economic reform unless you kill this monster. While caste thus occupied the center stage, he had not forgotten the impending danger capitalism posed to the working classes, of which Dalits were an integral part. It is therefore that in 1938 itself, he had pointed out that his struggle had an enemy duo, Brahminism and capitalism. The former was identified with the caste system, the feudal India, but capitalism was the ruling economic system, the creed of the emergent bourgeoisie. As for him, both these enemies would have been fought against through class struggle, as reflected in the experiment with the Independent Labour Party. But for the ugly communal turn in the Indian politics had taken, leaving him no option than give it up and get back to seemingly communal politics. The mainstream politics had blocked all formal avenues. The left forces who have befriended him and completely ignored him. After all, the ILP was avowedly the working class party, declaredly independent and arguably the first political party of the left, the communists being a part of the Congress Socialist Party at that time. The ILP did make a mark in politics and even so streets on Bombay province by successfully demonstrating how class and caste struggles could be conjointly fought. It was a Cripps report in February 1942 that had completely ignored the ILP as it was not a communal party. Ambedkar was forced to dissolve it and form the Scheduled Caste Federation immediately. He defined freedom in terms of the synthesis in his value trinity: liberty, equality, fraternity. Freedom is mistakenly equated with liberty. In Ambedkar's outline, freedom encompasses liberty, equality, fraternity. For Ambedkar, liberty comprises civil liberty and political liberty. Liberty is based on the common good and on democratic participation in civil